Okay, I want you to do something for me. Just for a second, picture a specific person in your life. You know the one. We all have someone who comes to mind. It's that person who makes every interaction feel, I don't know, difficult, draining maybe, confusing. It could be someone at work, an old friend, maybe even a family member. Just hold that person in your mind as we go through this together.
So is the person you're thinking of this one? The boss who listens so intently to your brilliant idea and then, not an hour later, presents it in the big meeting like it was their own stroke of genius? And what really stings, right? It isn't just that they stole the idea, it's how casual they are about it. It leaves you feeling totally invisible, used, like you're not even a person, just a tool for them to get ahead.
Or hey, maybe this is the person that popped into your head. That relationship that felt less like a partnership and more like a performance. A one-way street where your only job was to be the audience. You were the admirer, the cheerleader, the one who had to remember every little triumph of theirs. But when it came to you, your bad day, your struggles, just crickets. You were basically a mirror, and your only purpose was to reflect their own greatness back at them.
And then, of course, you've got this classic. You could be talking about something huge in your life, a crisis, a big promotion, even a loss, and you can almost watch it happen in slow motion as they find a way to pivot the entire conversation back to them in like 30 seconds flat. Your story just becomes a little launch pad for their much more important monologue.
You know, it's so easy, and honestly, it's totally human, to look at this kind of behavior and just slap a simple label on it. We call them arrogant, selfish, egotistical, a narcissist. We just assume they must be overflowing with self-love, right? That their ego is just too big to fit in the room. But what if that's not the real story at all? What if what we're actually seeing isn't strength, but a sign of a really profound and kind of tragic internal weakness?
Okay, let's really lean into this, because this is the key that unlocks everything. True clinical narcissism, it's not about having too much self-love. It's the complete and terrifying absence of it. It's a desperate, lifelong psychological defense that they've built, brick by brick, to hide a secret so painful the narcissist can't even admit it to themselves, that deep, deep, deep down, they feel utterly and completely worthless. What we see as arrogance is actually a tragedy in disguise.
So to really get how this all works, we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the mask they create, this false self. Then we'll dig into the deep wound it's designed to protect. After that, we're going to look at the actual neuroscience, how their brains can be physically different. We'll explore the two surprising childhood roads that both lead to the same destination. And then finally, and this is the most important part, we'll give you a toolkit for how to protect yourself and find some peace. All right, let's jump in. Section 1, the mask of perfection. See, to understand how a narcissist is made, you first have to get the core problem they are trying to solve every single day. And that problem, when you boil it all down, is just one thing: shame. And I don't just mean like embarrassment. I mean a profound, crushing feeling of being fundamentally flawed and unacceptable.
This right here shows the fundamental split at the heart of narcissism. See, most of us, we operate from what's called a true self. We know we're not perfect, we mess up, we have our vulnerabilities, but deep down, we have this stable sense that we're worthy of love, that we matter just as we are. The narcissist, though, they got a very different memo early in life, that their true, authentic self, with all its messy feelings and flaws, was totally unacceptable. So to survive, they built a false self, a perfect, flawless, invincible character to play. The only problem? This false self is hollow. It only feels real if other people are constantly telling it that it's real.
The best way to think about this false self is like a magnificent suit of armor. It's polished, it's impressive, it looks completely impenetrable. From the outside, it looks like the definition of strength. And the narcissist falls in love with this armor because it feels safe. It's the only thing standing between them and that terrifying vulnerability they carry inside. But this armor is incredibly high maintenance. It can't shine on its own. It needs constant polishing from the outside world, from you, from me, to keep from rusting over. So if that false self is a suit of armor, what keeps it shiny? What fuels it? Well, that brings us right to our next section, the wound beneath the armor. We're going to talk about what the armor is protecting and the very specific fuel that it needs to run. And that brings us to this critical idea of narcissistic supply.
So here's the deal. That shiny suit of armor runs on a specific kind of fuel. It's called narcissistic supply. Now, this can be anything from praise and compliments to making you feel envious or even making you feel afraid. It doesn't really matter if the attention is positive or negative, as long as it's attention that reinforces how special they are. And for them, this isn't just a preference, like how some of us like getting a compliment. No, this is a psychological necessity. It's like oxygen. Without a constant stream of it, their armor starts to crack, and that terrifying feeling of worthlessness starts to seep through the gaps. And this is why their reactions to criticism seem so wildly out of proportion. When you challenge their idea, or point out a mistake, or even just fail to give them the admiration they expect, you're doing so much more than just hurting their feelings. In their mind, you are literally taking a sledgehammer to their suit of armor. You are threatening the entire structure of their reality. This is what's called a narcissistic injury, and to them, it feels like an existential threat. You're poking a hole in the only thing keeping them psychologically afloat, and they will lash out with unbelievable force to destroy that threat.
Okay, let's get into the science of it all in section 3. We've talked about the psychology, you could call that the software. But is this also a hardware issue? Is there something physically different going on in their brains? Well, modern neuroscience says, yeah, pretty much. There are observable physical differences in the narcissistic brain that help explain why they act the way they do. Neuroimaging studies, brain scans, have highlighted a few key areas that just work differently in people with narcissistic personality disorder. We're going to zero in on 3 big ones you see here. First, the left anterior insula. Think of this as your emotional empathy center. Second, the prefrontal cortex. That's basically your brain's brake pedal. And third, the amygdala. That's your primal fear and rage alarm system. This chart breaks it down perfectly, so let's just take a minute here. First, look at the anterior insula. In narcissists, studies have found that this region, the part that lets you actually feel what someone else is feeling, can physically have less gray matter. I mean, think about that. It means they might understand you're sad on an intellectual level, but they just don't feel it with you. Next, the connection to the prefrontal cortex, the impulse control center. It's weak. It's like having faulty brakes on a car. So, when their amygdala, their rage center, gets triggered by some threat to their ego, and by the way, it's hyperactive, so it triggers super easily, there's nothing to stop the explosion. The result is what we call narcissistic rage, and it's an uncontrollable outburst designed to absolutely obliterate whatever they see as a threat. So you might have these biological tendencies, but our brains are shaped by experience, and that brings us to what many experts believe is the single most important factor: their childhood environment. For a long time, the debate was, is it caused by parents who are too nice or parents who are too mean? Well, the fascinating and really tragic truth is, both paths can lead to the exact same cliff.
Let's look at these 2 paths because they seem like total opposites. On one side, you have the golden child. This is the kid who's put on a pedestal, but they're praised for what they do, getting the A+, scoring the winning goal, not for who they are. So love becomes completely conditional on their performance. The lesson they learn is devastating. If you're average, you're unlovable. Then, on the other side, you have the deprived child. This kid is ignored, abused, or constantly criticized. To survive that emotional desert, they retreat into this fantasy world inside their own head where they're special, secretly brilliant, just misunderstood. The tragic irony is that whether they were treated like a trophy or like trash, the outcome is exactly the same. The child was never actually seen or loved for their authentic self.
Let's make this real. Here's a golden child example. Picture the charismatic CEO. He was that trophy kid. His entire identity was built on winning. So now as an adult, he cannot stand any sign of failure. When an employee makes a small mistake in a presentation, it doesn't just annoy him. It triggers that deep childhood fear that if he's not perfect, he's worthless. So he projects that feeling outward, humiliating the employee in front of everyone just to distance himself from the failure. Now, here's an example from the deprived child path, which often leads to a more covert or vulnerable type of narcissism. Meet the martyr mom. She grew up feeling completely invisible. Now, as a parent, she uses guilt and self-sacrifice to get her narcissistic supply. Her kids' growing independence, getting a driver's license, going off to college, is terrifying to her. Because if her child doesn't need her 24/7, she has to face that old, unbearable feeling of being unwanted and invisible all over again. Okay, so after all of this, after understanding the shame, the armor, the brain science, the childhood wounds, we get to the most important part of this whole thing. What on earth do you do about it? Because understanding why is powerful, but it doesn't fix the problem of having this person in your life. This section, this is your guide to protecting your own peace. This is the question everybody asks, and the honest, hard answer is, it's extremely rare. See, narcissism is what clinicians call ego syntonic, which is just a fancy way of saying they don't think they have a problem. They think the problem is with everyone else. Change, if it happens at all, usually only starts after something called a narcissistic collapse. That's when their whole world comes crashing down. They lose the job, the spouse, the supply, all at once. And only in that moment of absolute crisis is there a tiny window for real change through a ton of therapy. But you cannot and you should not try to make that happen. So, since you can't change them, you have to change your approach to them. The goal shifts from trying to fix them or get them to see your side to simply protecting yourself. So here it is, your 3-step toolkit for disengagement. These aren't tools to fight them, they're tools to build a fortress for your own well-being. They are compassionate detachment, becoming a gray rock, and setting boundaries without getting into a debate.
Let's break this down. First, compassionate detachment. This means you understand their behavior comes from trauma. When they lash out, you literally picture that scared kid inside the suit of armor. Now, this does not excuse their behavior, not at all, but it lets you take it less personally. Their attacks just lose some of their sting. Second, become a gray rock. Narcissists feed on emotional reactions, good or bad, they don't care. When you become as boring and uninteresting as a plain old rock, giving one-word answers, showing no emotion, you starve them of the supply they need from you. And third, set firm boundaries. State your limit clearly and calmly, I will not be spoken to that way, and then you disengage. You walk away, you end the call. You do not get sucked into an endless argument about why you're setting the boundary. The boundary itself is the final word.
Look, in the end, dealing with a narcissist can feel like a battle you can just never, ever win. But maybe that's the wrong way to look at it entirely. Understanding the science and the tragedy behind their mask, it doesn't excuse their abuse, not for a second, but it can be the key to your own freedom. It lets you stop trying to get water from a dry well. It lets you let go of all that consuming anger and replace it with a clear-eyed understanding that empowers you to detach, to set boundaries, and to finally walk away in peace, appreciating your own incredible ability to be an authentic, imperfect, and whole human being.